How is everybody today? I just want to thank you guys for tuning in to the Young Faith podcast. I wanted to let everybody know that the podcast is currently hosted on Spotify, but also we're on Apple Music now. But every episode is documented on the Young Faith website. Youngfaith.info is the URL to that website. But today's the title of today's episode is Choose for Yourselves This Day. And a little bit of backstory about this. This is coming out of the book of Joshua, chapter 24, verses 14 and 15. The bulk of the text will come out of verses 15. But a little backstory here is Joshua, the um, the head here. He's on his last days on the earth. He only has a few more days left on the earth because he's 100. He dies at 110 years old. That's what we know. And what he's telling you is he's getting the Israelites prepared for his time to pass. Um, the first verse here says, Then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned the elders, leaders, judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. That was verse 1. Now verse 14 says, Now fear the Lord, and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. Verse 15 says, But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. So this is coming out of the book of Joshua, chapter 24. Um, and pretty much here we can look, and Joshua is making them choose of the idols or other gods or the Lord. And they have a free will here. They have a free choice here. Um, they can make their own decision. They're they can pick either way they want to here. And so we know they have free will. But we can see a part of the verse says, "Choose for yourselves this day." So what this means is this is just Joshua. This is Joshua saying, choose if you want to serve the Lord or don't. But what's important about choose for yourself this day, if we look at the last two words of this phrase here, Joshua's implying that they don't have a time to wait. They don't have a time to hesitate. Joshua's telling them, don't wait. He told them to choose now. And we can look at the beginning verse, chapter 24, verse 1. When Joshua assembled everyone, he summoned all of the people to to Shechem. So we almost could call this as a election day. Not just the common people came, everyone came. Everyone came. Everyone was summoned. They all had to make a choice that day. Um, and what this is all taking place in Shechem. And what I mentioned earlier is he called on everyone. He didn't just call on we know that he didn't just call like on the common people or like the regular citizens. He summoned everyone. The Bible actually lists here in chapter 24 the elders, the leaders, the judges, the officials of Israel, and they all presented themselves before the Lord. So what we know here is that it wasn't just the common people, it was also the important people. And a little history about Shechem. The Hebrew word Shechem means shoulder. And it actually fits perfectly because if we look at the geographical location of Shechem, there's mountains on each side. Shechem is in between two big mountains. So the meaning shoulder makes sense. Shechem means shoulder. It makes sense here. Um, we also know that Shechem is a very biblical place for Israel. It's a very historical place as well. We know it's biblical and historical. Um, God's promise to Abram. When God promised Abraham, um, the remains of Joseph are here in Shechem, and this is also the Kohathites' land. This is the land which they dwell. Um, but what Joshua was stressing here is telling the Israelites, don't hesitate. But there could be many different reasons here why the Israelites would have hesitated. Maybe they hesitated because they didn't know the difference in, well, why do we hesitate is what I'm trying to get the point. Why do we hesitate? Um, Maybe for some of us we don't understand the difference in fear and faith, um, comfort or commitments. Some of us like to be comfortable. We don't like to have commitment. What we can understand here is with hesitation that there are many different reasons why we may we may hesitate. And like I said, many reasons is because it's different for everyone. Not everyone struggles with the topic of fear and faith. Not everyone struggles with having to be comfortable, or not everyone struggles with commitment issues. Not everyone struggles with that. So there's many different reasons why someone could hesitate. We can look here at Proverbs chapter 20, verse 5. It says, "The purpose in a man's heart is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out." But if we look at hesitation and the way humans hesitate nowadays, most of the time we will hesitate in a high stress situation when we're in a fight or flight situation, when we don't have time to think, or we don't have time to examine thoughts. That's the case for a lot of people, but a lot of people don't struggle with hesitation. A lot of people will come to a situation and have to make two options immediately, and it's not very hard for them. But then there's some people who have to look over and and look and see, if I make if I make this decision, where is this going to lead me? If I make this decision, where is this going to take me? What what path am I going to be taking there? Um, so that may be another reason why we hesitate. Um, but hesitation delays growth. Growth is always a good thing. Everyone always wants to grow. When um Probably a few years ago, I've always wanted to be tall, and now I'm tall. So I wanted to grow. I wanted to grow immediately. But when we hesitate here, especially spiritually, hesitation delays growth. But after the Israelites made a choice here, or after we make a choice here, um, we don't need to be lukewarm. Revelation chapter 3 verse 16 says, "So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth." And I don't exactly know the verse before that word for word, but the Bible tells us before that God would prefer us to be hot, or he would prefer us to be cold. And so after we realize that we don't need to be lukewarm, we need to realize that we don't need to look back after we made a choice. There is a story here. Luke chapter 17, verse 32. It's actually a very short verse. It's a three-word verse, but it's very important. It's remember Lot's wife. And as some people may know the story of Lot, some might not. Um, Lot took his family to Sodom and Gomorrah, and they came and they told them that sulfur was going to rain on top of Sodom and Gomorrah just because all of the wicked. And to pretty much summarize the story, as they were leaving, they told them, "Do not look back at Sodom and Gomorrah." And Lot's wife looked back at Sodom and Gomorrah and was turned to a pillar of salt. So after we make the choice, we don't need to look back. But looking back can also play into hesitation. But what's important here is we need to remember Lot's wife and not to look back. But what's also very important is that each generation needs to be reminded about this. And you may ask, reminded about what? Each generation needs to be given the choice, either if they're going to serve idols or other gods or God. Moses also reminded the Israelites. Joshua took the place of Moses when Moses had his last days on the earth. Joshua took his place. And what we can see from here is each great leader will always leave their final message, or like their final message. And Moses and Joshua's were pretty much the same. Moses in Exodus chapter 20, verse 22 through 23, then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites this: You have seen for yourselves that I have spoken to you from heaven. Do not make any gods to be alongside me. Do not make for yourselves gods of silver or gold, or gods of gold." So we can realize here is with Moses and Joshua, there was a very importance. The Lord was very important about the Israelites knowing that they had to make a choice and to not serve idols or other gods from their ancestors or from across the Euphrates River, as Joshua chapter 24, verse 15 says. But what's important is we all serve somebody. We all have to serve. No man is independent. Either we're going to serve God, or back then it was idols, or it was foreign gods. It was idols or foreign gods. But now it's either we serve God or we serve the world. And influence is a really big thing here. Influence is the influence someone has on another, or the impact, or the effect. That's why influence is so important. That's why the people you hang around, the people you fellowship with, is so important, because no man is independent. We always look up to someone. So if we surround ourselves by good people, good godly people, then they should influence us to be sort of in that direction. But, if we surround ourselves by people for the world, which um it's just a general bad influence, we can learn from that, and we'll take that path which we don't need to take. So influence, we need to surround ourselves by godly influence. And lucky for the Israelites, they were constantly around either Moses or Joshua, which were two very good godly influences. So Joshua and Moses made the Israelites make a decision that day, and I feel like it's fair enough that we also need to make a decision today. Um, are we going to say yes, or are we going to say no? The answer to this yes or no question will determine where you or where we will be in 100 years. So we really have to take into account the importance of this yes or no question, because it will determine where we will be in 100 years. But if the answer is yes, don't wait on anyone. Don't wait on anyone. Don't wait on anyone to run after God and be on fire for Him. And as a teenager, it's easy to struggle with this topic. It's easy to see your friends influence, like I mentioned earlier. It's easy to see a group of friends that aren't living for Christ, and they will influence you. Or if you have a church friend and you want to run after God, you want to be on fire for God, but you realize that, you know, don't always look to someone. Don't always wait. Don't wait on your neighbor. Don't wait on someone beside you. Um, but we have to also take into account that God can't force us to love Him. God can't force us to obey Him. God can't force us to even read our Bible. God can't force us to do any of these things. That's what I mentioned earlier, that the Israelites had free will, because God wasn't going to force the Israelites into following Him. Luckily enough, we read later in that chapter that the Israelites did make to um, the Israelites made the wise decision to follow the Lord. But we know that if we read the Old Testament, we see a lot that the Israelites were jumping around. They would follow God and serve God, and then they would hesitate and drop back to other gods. Um, but another important point is we also really, really have to understand that there are forms of idolatry today. There are many different forms of idolatry today. Um, an idol is anything that you love more than God. But idol also can be anything that attempts to take the place of God. And especially in the world nowadays with the amount of technology we have, idolatry can be a lot easier now than it was then. So we really have to watch out for different forms of idolatry today. But earlier when I asked the question, when I said that, are we going to say yes or no? If our answer is yes, then we have the great opportunity to lean on God and grow from reading the Word and seeking godly wisdom. Um, I'm going to read one more verse and then we'll wrap this up. We have Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 through 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. And earlier, before I close this out, I mentioned influence, about the influence the world can have on us and the impact that godly people can have on us. If we look at Joshua chapter 15, just in the later, it says, "But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." So, with knowing that, we knew that the Israelites did have a godly influence because Joshua proclaimed in the beginning, before anyone answered, Joshua proclaimed that for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. So that's a great godly influence. Well, I appreciate everyone who tuned in um, tonight with this message. Like I mentioned earlier, we're not just on Spotify anymore. We're also on Apple Podcast and then Spotify, of course. We're trying to branch out to um, a few more different Spotify platforms, but we're also we also have a website. It's youngfaith.info, and every episode that is made, you will be able to find on the website and listen through the website. So that's actually pretty cool, and we're blessed to have the opportunity to do that. Well, I appreciate you guys for tuning into the Young Faith podcast,